No.
My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are joining us for the first time tonight? Oh my goodness, so many of you. Well, the Center for Fiction is a 200-year-old cultural nonprofit whose mission is to encourage people to read and value fiction and to support and celebrate its creation and enjoyment. And we do this through public events like this one, reading groups, and writing workshops, all offering vibrant, accessible, and inclusive programs that welcome a wide community to experience the joy of story. Our Kids Read program offers immersive reading experiences for children, and we support early career writers with our first novel prize and our Emerging Writers Fellowship. Visit our site, sign up for our mailing list, and follow us on social media. And to support our work creating a home for readers and writers here in Brooklyn, please consider becoming a member so that you're tuned into all of our activities and come back and see us soon. For example, tickets are now on sale for this year's first novel fete. It's one of our favorite traditions, celebrating the 7 authors who are short, really fun. So please come. For tonight, some important logistics. After the talk, we'll have an audience Q&A, and if you're here in the room, please raise your hand, and one of our interns will bring a microphone to you. That's so that the folks who are watching on the live stream can hear your question as well. And if you're watching on the live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. Let's see. Mariana and Megan were kind enough to pre-sign your books, and be doing a personalization line after the event, just on the other side of this wall. As I think we told some of you, we are hosting a private event upstairs tonight too that ends around the same time as this, so the bookstore may be a little extra crowded after the event tonight, but don't let that stop you from buying your book if you haven't already. And if you already have it, you'll just line up in here for the personalization line. All right, and now for the good stuff. 6 years ago, my friend told me about Mariana Enriquez's work and spoke of it as if she had found the Holy Grail, or possibly the unholy grail. As soon as the first English translation was published here, she put it in my hands, and I saw right away why she was such a devoted fan and have been working to bring Mariana and her fabulous translator, Megan, here since then. Tonight is the night. For a conversation led by our own Melissa Lozado Oliva, author of the forthcoming collection Beyond Reasonable Doubt, Jesus is Alive, please welcome Mariana Enriquez and Megan McDowell and Melissa.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Mariana and Megan, for being here, having a conversation with me. I don't want to be weird backstage, but I'm such a big fan, and you've been so influential to my writing and my outlook on life. I love how you can make me feel so disgusted and so moved. How you can find beauty in body horror. But I wouldn't have been able to read your stories because my Spanish isn't what it should be without the amazing translation of Megan. I wanted to read a few lines from this collection, A Sunny Place for Shady People, that I particularly loved. Um, Time, that crushing monstrosity, time was the only thing you couldn't stop, and you couldn't even feel it. And being young was an instant, being trapped in a mirror and sobbing. Then it doesn't matter if we don't know him. He is someone, he was someone. Those were all very beautiful lines in a book that is really gross. And I think so. There's two kinds of translating that are happening here in your book. There is the translation from Spanish to English, and Mariana, you are also translating the Argentinian political landscape into a horror story. So could you both talk to me about that?
Well, um, about translating the Argentinian context.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about this a little earlier today. A lot of the things that I find myself asking Mariana questions about have to do with that particular context. And I'm always interested in how she feels about that because um, it kind of turns her into someone who's explaining certain things about the culture. Like I have asked her, well, I guess more. This is more in Our Share of Night, but there's a character who's a political activist, and there was just certain things that I didn't know about his job and his background and things that I have to ask about that specifically pertain to that, and a lot of things about the forensic workers who work to dig up the mass graves. And I learned through translating Mariana that there's an organization, there's a database where you can go and give your DNA to trace bodies, and there's a lot of it that I don't know, and so that, and then on the other hand, a lot of the references of specifically um, Argentine or Latin American or indigenous myths and mythologies that are specific to the place. I think those are the two things that I ask about most often, and those are the things that I always have to think about, like what are people going to understand here, and what do I kind of need to guide them in or explain a little bit, because a lot of if I have a question about something too. That's something that I have to understand and be able to communicate with.
Yeah, I think I am naturally, and because of how I write, I already like to explain. I'm not a writer that is so my characters, not me, but my characters are people that are talking to someone all the time, or most of the time. Less in a novel, more in the short stories. It's like they always have a witness. And to some degree, the translator is that. But still, they are talking from places that are very familiar and to me that are very, very Argentinian. But the thing is, I never, when I read like writers that are very, very local writers, let's say, I don't know, Carson McCullers. I never, or even let's go back, Emily Bronte. In the first Wuthering Heights I had, Moors was not translated.
Oh, the
So it was the
more.
Moor. So it was just
Huh.
what is a Moor? And it seemed to me I was something very vast and desertic, but I didn't understand how that it was. So I thought it must be something like Patagonia or Pampa, but then it didn't have grass and it was black. So I was like, what is it? And I didn't understand.
I didn't either when I read those books as a kid.
Yes. And then there was another one that came that I read because I was a fan. And it said Paramo. I said, but that's not the Paramo, exactly. The more is not the Paramo. And I only knew what it was when I got an encyclopedic dictionary and it had a picture. And I said, oh, that's and it looks like kind of all these things, but it's not any of these things. And I never did not enjoy the Little Nights because of that, or because all the things that I didn't really understand because I trusted it. And I think part of the thing that comes with the relationship between the writer and the translator is that I think that he trusts that I'm saying something that is true. Even if you don't know exactly what it is. It's like, why, for example, this character of Luis, why is he, what has been an activist and he has disappeared? Why? What what went on here? Why was he a worker? And she knows that I'm not inventing this. This comes from a place of truth, and that atmosphere comes from a place of truth, and that I think makes it easier, and it makes it easier that she asks a lot,
Yeah.
because sometimes they don't ask a lot, and you are like, what is going on? Because I know there's things that they're impossible for people to know. I don't know if impossible, but complicated. And we're that's a weird sound.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I feel I'm seeing kind of, it's kind of like, I mean, to tap into the spookiness of the novel, it's like Megan is the medium of your
Exactly.
translation, and and in the same way, the narrator of My Sad Dead is kind of like helping these people shuttle to the other side because she has time and asks them questions, and that kind of thing. Your stories aren't just ghost stories, and it's not just body horror. There are bags of bloody milk. There are men with large bald heads who are flashing in and out of reality. In Our Share of Night, there's a drawer full of eyelids. There is a. I'm just gonna keep going. There's well, so the last one is a woman nursing a worm, and I think that this kind of horror is like a cosmic horror. It's like a Lynchian horror. What use do you find in tapping into that space, and not just having like a ghost story, but making something that is like a level above supernatural, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. Do you need this? Yes. It's just, you're going to think I'm very weird, but it's just images to me that appear.
Uh-huh.
Like, for example, in that story, it's called A Local Artist. It came from something real that was to go to a town that had been abandoned by the train. This is something that really happens in Argentina. It was a whole issue in the 90s. There's a government that stopped a lot of trains. That was strangely political, the story. And those towns were abandoned. So my idea when I went to these towns, because they started like tourist, thingies to try to make them alive again, I was wondering what could happen in all those years when they were isolated and alone. And of course, that was Lovecraft, and then it ended with
Yes.
that kind of worm there. That is very disgusting.
Yeah.
But it's kind of cute.
It is kind
But
of cute. It's like a little baby.
it's a baby.
And he's a painter.
He's a painter.
Yeah.
And that came because in the train station that was used as a cultural center, there were some paintings that were absolute. The paintings are real. I have the pictures of the paintings. I don't know if I didn't send you
Yeah, you did.
Yes, I sent her because she was trying to understand the paintings, how they were, and say, "Oh, I have them here." They're totally out of place in this situation, and I don't know why they hang them there. So somehow these paintings, this town, this idea, when I came back home, there was a worm in it. And this happens all the time in my mind. The situations kind of have a synthesis that is a horrific image. But not to me.
Yeah.
To me, it's like a conclusion of a lot of little ugly things or sad things, and they take kind of a shape. And that shape tends to be a horrific shape.
I love that. I love that because I think horror, and it's kind of like a punchline at the end of at the story, and I'm like, the story, you're like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And boom, someone is nursing a worm.
Yeah.
But
She doesn't really want to.
she doesn't really want to.
No.
She, it's her job.
Well, she's destined
She's
to
destined.
it.
It's her
Yeah, but
destiny.
it's not. It's a very okay.
But speaking of that, because it is a ridiculous situation,
Yeah.
there is so much humor in every story, and the characters are kind of like sarcastic or jaded. I found myself laughing a lot. What do you think is the relationship between horror and humor, and Megan, what is it like to translate a Latin American sense of humor into English?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the horror kind of depends on the humor in the sense that the humor or the horror depends on the voice. And one of the things that Mariana does so beautifully is like there are so many characters who have these voices that you feel close to immediately, and they react to these crazy things that happen to them in oftentimes a very matter of fact way. So the narrator of My Sad Dead, like she's a kind of a sardonic, very capable, doctor woman. She lives on her own. The way she talks about her husband is,
Yeah.
he's great. We're still friends, but I need my space, and he needs to care for someone. There's a very distinct voice that's funny, and that I do have a lot of fun teasing out the humor. The same is true for the narrator of Metamorphosis. And the line that I thought you were going to quote is about the doctor where she walks into the room and she just oozes, it exudes this perfume, and you do play. I was kind of playing with the voice and just in trying to make it exude this kind of sarcasm or irony and this kind of distance from or objectivity, I guess, from the world around them, so that when they do start seeing ghosts, you trust them,
Right.
So
Yeah, there's like a trust involved in making someone laugh and also making someone. Or
right,
you're
exactly.
like afraid. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Like once you laugh, you're in it. Like you trust this story. You're committed to it.
Yeah, and also humor and horror are to me, are very similar in the sense that with both, you can say things that maybe you can't with other genres or whatever tones. Let's say there's a tone to it. There's certain things that if we are clear in the code that this is a joke, we can say something outrageous. If we are clear in the code that this is fiction and dark fiction and horror, I can talk about a woman nursing a worm and it's funny.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying when you read it, hopefully, too. But it's a matter of tone and code and voice in the end. And my characters tend to be, some no, like in the novel, for example, maybe some of you read it, like the character of Juan, he takes himself very seriously. So his voice, and I take himself very seriously, although I have a crush on him too, so I take himself very seriously. So he's very much like that, but
Juan in my head is Alexander Skarsgård.
he's Alexander
Totally,
Skarsgård.
yeah.
Am I wrong?
Don't put this online.
This is just between us.
Because one day he will know and I will die. Or because I will have to say you're too old for the
He
movie.
can learn Spanish. Oh no, he's too old for the movie.
No.
No.
Please. No, but in terms of the character, yes, because the character is 20 something.
Yes.
But
Ageless.
we can do whatever he
Yeah.
wants.
You
And
can do anything.
but anyway, he takes himself very seriously, but not other characters. Like even the evil ones are kind of, especially Mercedes. She's kind of bitchy.
Yeah.
Like she's evil, but she's kind of bitchy. And I think one of the things that happens, especially in the short stories, is that mostly they don't take themselves that seriously.
Yeah.
And therefore, when the horror happens, they're still the same person. They don't become solemn. Like, I'm seeing this, red thing that is, haunting me. They are
Right.
like,
Yeah.
there's something there.
Right.
Which is, most of the time, is what we would
Yep,
do.
it just happens. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a question of tone. It's most of the time what we would do. We were like, what was that?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be like the shroud of.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a different era of horror, and it's been through pop, through movies, through already it's been almost ruined, like with all the movies, very sarcastic movies of the
Yeah.
90s. It was almost already ruined. And then,
Mhm.
I mean, all kind of things happened, and but at the end of the day you laugh and you fear things, and this is something very recognizable. So these things are very easy to tap into as a writer, because I know what's funny and I know what's scary.
Yeah.
Everybody knows.
Yeah. Um, I a big theme in this book is transformation, I think,
Yeah.
and women's bodies and um like this fear of aging. In Metamorphosis, a woman gets her a fibroid removed
Yeah.
from her uterus, and she becomes really obsessed with it, and it's almost like sexual, and she gets it attached to her
Or
back.
maternal.
Yeah, and maternal. Oh, it's not. I misread. It's very, very different.
Well, I mean, it's both and
It's
either.
both. It could be both. Um,
One thing leads to the
one
other.
thing leads to the other. But I was wondering if you can talk about. I mean, maybe this is an obvious question, but like, what what makes like women stories so like uniquely set up for body horror?
I start and then you follow, because we are in. She's younger than me. We are in a body horror situation. What happens after 40? It's. I mean, it's not that men have their own body horror. It's like the body horror of women, and it has to do a lot with how women bodies are looked. Men, to me, men go through a lot of situations of body horror that I will never put any of these situations down. Like even, even going to war is a body horror situation. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine what it is. Or many sports even. I'm a very big fan of sports in general, and if you look at it, it's horrific what they do to their bodies.
Yeah.
But the women too. But in men, it's more money, it's more
Destroyed, yeah.
pressure there. But but men are not observed as women. It's not the same. There's not a constant, like if I look for some serum, for example, in Instagram, I get the next day endless serums.
Yeah.
This is horrific. Because
You
I
get
don't
the
know if the
substance.
one that I got is the good one. I don't know if I should stop doing this because it's feeding the machine. I don't know if the thing is listening to me.
Right.
I don't know anything. And also, there's things like 6 years ago, I would never put something called hyaluronic acid on my face. Never. Never.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking
Now-
for the best one. You know? And this gaze, they always call it the male gaze. It's not the male gaze, it's the gaze of society. You are under scrutiny all the time. But it's not just your look, your weight, it's everything. And that makes you feel that you have a light here.
Yeah.
So everything that happens is magnified. And from that to horror, no, that's nothing. That's one thing. The other thing is that women's bodies suffer, of course, everybody, but the transformation that women's bodies suffer this time of your life, it's absolutely underwritten, let's say.
Warning.
There's no warning, there's no literature
Explanation.
about it, there's no words.
Preparation.
There's no preparation, there's nothing. And it's very violent.
Yeah.
So that is something that when it happens to you, you have to write about. The same as when you're a teenager. You're a teenager, you have a certain body, and then woo, 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 things happen and everybody's looking at you.
Right.
And you don't understand. So, and everything has to do with the way they see you. And I find that very, very a field for body horror that it's explored in my own experience, immediate experience. And with the only thing I have, that is my body.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the first person to say that living in a female body is to be afraid a lot. And and so I think like horror and body horror is tied up with inhabiting a female body. And then when you get into questions like generational trauma, which is what the Face of Disgrace talks about, or menopause, which the myoma, what do you call it, the fibroid. That surgery is something that I had while I was working on the story, and the thing that prepared me for the story, for the surgery, was reading the story.
Wow.
Like I've never had an experience like that before, where it was like such a visceral experience of translating. But it's true, she talks about how they take a picture of it and send it to you.
Yeah.
And you're looking at this thing that
You're
comes
supposed
from
to
your
sign
body,
it, yeah.
and you really do feel like you're watching. It's like something out of a horror movie.
Right.
Doctors do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's so much to look forward to in life is a constant gift.
You will get movies
Yeah.
in a few years.
Yeah. I
Maybe
think
a prototype.
yeah. Jesus. I think I want to talk a little bit more about like burdens and punishments in Face of Disgrace. I think is that the right? A woman, her face starts disappearing, and she has inherited this from her mother, who she realized that she never had a face when she knew her. She just had makeup on. Very scary, very unsettling. But it is this tale of intergenerational trauma and kind of just like carrying burdens you never asked for, but also kind of like paying a price you never negotiated for. Can you talk to me about burden and punishment?
I was thinking a lot about it after something that is related but not really that direct. There was this mythology of the birds in the northeast of Argentina, and I started investigating it a lot for the novel, and then I kept on, and I realized that in the novel it's the flowers, and then I realized the birds, that the mythology there, metamorphosis was a punishment for women, and they metamorphosized women into birds and flowers, almost exclusively. The god of these original people from there. So once I was thinking, so every bird that is around me here is a woman in pain.
Yeah.
It's like Herzog in the jungle. And from that, I started thinking, for what are women punished in mythology and things like that? And most of the time is misconduct. And most of the time is having fun.
Right. And desire. Yeah.
Sex and fun. And so I started exploring that in the mythology. There's a very interesting myth that I missed in Things We Lost in the Fire that I found, of a woman that had some kind of mental health problem. It's called La Telecita. And she goes and dances in parties at night, and in one of them, it may vary, but most of the time she catches fire from the candles in the party, and she's burned dancing in front of everybody. Like, it's a very beautiful and horrendous image at the same time, but she's punished because of this, because she's a free spirit. And then I started to think about the opposite of that. There was what happens with when one kind of punishes ourselves with silence, and especially with the experience of sexual abuse. That is kind of, it's always the the dirty secret that women carry, and they don't even tell themselves. So I explore that in both of that. Because there's the burden of not being able of telling your children, for example, what happened to you. It's like we learn all the time. We shouldn't be scared of this. We should open up. We should start this, the cycle of violence and silence. We should not be ashamed of what happened. This is all rhetoric. At the Sometimes we break that, but at the end of the day, you learn about your mom that had this or that
Yeah.
situation when you're 45,
Right.
and you wonder
maybe
why,
she's not there.
and maybe
Yeah.
she's not there, and maybe you wonder why you're repeating certain patterns, why she was like that, and this is what happens. And the rhetoric is fine, but I wanted to go behind that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also the woman getting punished. It's almost like a warning. It's like if you do this, this will happen. And in a way, like the story is like to protect those girls and those young women, so that like this doesn't happen to them because the world is a dangerous place and so much could happen to them that isn't just like turning into a bird or getting set on fire. Um, I am going to pivot a little bit and talk about. So we talked briefly about Mr. Skarsgård, but I want to talk about your your cross cultural influences. Reading this, I saw a lot of Stephen King. I saw some Shirley Jackson. But in your acknowledgments, you thank Lana Del Rey and Taylor Swift. You are an unabashed fan. It is why I am a fan of you. Can you talk to me about being a fan and also how these pop culture icons influence your work?
I've been a fan, and I'm waiting for my fan books to be translated. Actually, I have to. I have a like I'm doing a trilogy. Sorry, about fan situations. And I've been a fan since my first really serious fandom that you can tell, because there's also Lucas was doing, and I was obsessed. Like seriously, once there was a music magazine that had Big Road, was the keyboard player on the cover, and it said John Taylor, and I was totally upset about that. But really upset about that. Like talking to my mother, I wrote a letter to the magazine like it's wrong. John Taylor was my love, and was not John Taylor, okay? And but fandom to me, like I read their articles, and I remember to this day one article where one of them said this song is a mix of Chic the band, and the Sex Pistols. So because I was a fan of them, I went to Chic, and from Chic I went to Stax, and from Stax I went to Prince. And to Prince I went to Stevie Wonder, and somehow I ended listening to rap because of this. And then on the other side, I went to the Sex Pistols. I discovered punk. I, painted my hair and went out. I did fanzines, and all this came from being a fan or something. So to me, it's not an alienation thing. To me, it's a liberating thing. To me, it's connections. To me, it's coming from one artist that influences you. And this could be like, I'm a big fan of Rimbaud. I don't say I'm a big reader of Rimbaud. I'm a fan. I went to the grave. I had a cry. I wrote my favorite lines of his poems in the rock. I mean, it was like an experience. I wanted to stay there.
It's kind of religious.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think in times like this, fandom had such a bad rep for a long time. And as a woman, it's like the equivalent of being historical, like a pathological hysterical. And really, women are choosing who are important in pop culture. And with this, I end and give it to her. But for example, the Beatles. Why on earth those four guys? Because the girls were screaming for them and not for the kings. for example, or not for the Rolling Stones, which I really don't understand that part. They scream. They did scream for the Rolling Stones later, but the girls made him. The girls made John Lennon.
Yeah.
Because, well, it was, they tell you no, but while my guitar gently wept, it was ages later. This is, can I hold your hand or whatever? I don't like the Beatles. Can I twist and shout, whatever? Who was it? It was the girls. The girls noticed that Elvis
girls.
was super hot,
Yeah.
and Johnny Cash was super intense, but he was not hot. And it was a bit weird, the sound of the band.
Yeah.
But this other guy was like, you know. So it's the girls that we've been choosing what matters in pop culture forever. And don't dare say to me that that is not creative.
Yeah.
When I'm the gatekeeper. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I
You
think
only
mine-
have
mine
one.
works.
Sorry. You don't need this.
So I wanted to talk about the refrigerator. Actually, I have so many questions. Okay. The refrigerator cemetery reminded me a lot of this place where Juan in Our Share of Night goes, which is like this like layer of like in between life and death. And I feel like I wanted to ask, and it made me wonder if this is like a place you go when you're writing, a place you go when you're dreaming, and what is it like to like invoke this in between space?
I'd say it fast so Megan can tap into that because there's an in between place. I think translation is a liminal space too. I go there for, I like peripheric narratives. I don't like the main avenues of anything. I wasn't, that's not my culture. I was born in the suburbs. I was born in the border. I was born in an irrelevant country. I like the peripheric thing and the liminal spaces between what lies in the middle of things, and in the middle of language also. So to me, it's very natural. That's why my fiction lives there, I think. And I find it more and more relevant now because I think we're all in between realities
Yeah.
nowadays. We're not here, not there. We don't know if we are holograms or people.
Yeah.
And but that, you know, that is has happening now. But translation is that it's also something in between.
Yeah, I think like I love the metaphor that you gave earlier of translator as a medium, because sometimes it really does feel like that. Like you try and channel something when you're translating, and I spend a lot of time just thinking about a particular word sometimes. I also, like, these days, and this is, if any of my editors are here, this is why it takes so long. But I read everything out loud in Spanish, and then I read it out loud in English, and I pay attention to the rhythm and the sound, and think, like every story, every novel has particular words that you find yourself coming back to, and you think about their kind of ramifications and the way that they branch out, and you kind of just sit with them and feel what they do to you. And that's really a key part of translation for me. I have to think about like why these words are there.
I have two more questions, and then we're gonna go to the audience. Oh my god, I think I'm gonna burp. No, I didn't. Okay. Okay. I want to talk about a relationship between camaraderie between women in this book and disgust. And I guess this is also like a liminal space question, but there's this like, a line between camaraderie and disgust, beauty and repulsion. This idea that like I don't want that to, I don't, I am really disgusted at this person who's sick, or I'm really grossed out by this rotting person, this dead person, but no, one day that will be me. Could you talk about just like towing that line? Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to say something. We don't have that much time, so I'm going to be like very blunt about it. I like horror because horror reminds me that I'm going to rot.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a vanitas. It's not if you want to go a bit, elegant about it.
Yeah.
Because I really like Memento Moris and Vanitas and all that imaginary when death was much more present.
Yeah.
I don't think death is present a lot in our culture these days. I think that is kind of a problem, but that's my culture too. I'm not like, but where is present, where you see death all the time in the reality of fiction, because fiction has a reality, is mostly in horror. More than in, for example, people tell me true crime. No, in true crime you see the investigation and you're asking for a reason,
An answer.
an
Yeah.
answer. Like, why did this happen? Horror tells you it just happens, okay? You can't really, and you die.
Yeah.
This is what horror tells you. You die, man. And it's awful.
Yeah. And it's
Over.
awful. Yeah.
It is awful. Even if you believe that there's going to be something else,
No, it
the
sucks.
process it sucks.
Yeah.
And the process of decomposing sucks.
And reading horror is a way to like look that in the face and then come
Yes.
back from it.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like
A way of
practicing
being
for
present,
it in
yeah.
in a safe space. And I always go back to there's a line that Stephen King writes about this, where he talks about like a hierarchy of horror, where it's there's horror, terror, and disgust, and one of them is kind of the sublime, where it's a fear of what's to come. I guess you could call it suspense. And one of them is a fear of what you see in front of you. And then another one, and then the other one is disgust. It's like Reagan throwing up in The Exorcist. It's
Yeah.
this horrible thing that you just recoil from on a visceral level. And you need the interplay of all three of those. And I think about that all the time when I'm translating Mariana, because they're all there.
Yeah.
You know? There's like the sensory horror, the like visceral disgust. There's a sense of dread, and then there's the horrible things that you're looking at right in front of you.
Yeah. To remember that you're alive.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question.
There's a fly.
Oh,
Just gonna
we're all rotting. My last question is: could you both tell me something that you're afraid of?
public speaking.
Yeah.
That's why I write horror, because I'm really scared of. I'm really scared of the body, actually, of being sick, of the body being in danger, of the vulnerability of the body in general, and of the mind. To me, it's the same. Losing your mind, losing your body, death in the end.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, I write about that too. Because I can not think about it. Some people can go through life, at least putting it here. I can't. Because I'm anxious, so everything is going to collapse and go to hell.
Yeah.
And any second, and everything is going to be awful. And I don't know.
Yeah. That's why I like horror too.
I think it's related. It's the same thing, but it's specifically losing my memory. You know, I have a twin sister, and we have a lot of the same memories. You know, because we grew up together, we experienced the same things. But it happens to me all the time, where she remembers something that I don't remember, and I feel like that's almost practice for what's going to happen to me when I get old and senile.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you lose your whole personal story.
Yeah, that is very scary.
Yeah.
And it's also related with losing language.
Losing language, losing your agency.
Yeah.
In My Sad Dead, the ghosts here don't have agency, and it's like the narrator is like giving it back to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm
thank
gonna
you.
change it to the audience questions. I'm gonna okay.
Hi.
Hi.
So first of all, thank you for both of your work and the translation and the book. So I have a question for both of you. different sets of questions, but related to the same thing. Part of my childhood, I grew up in Barrial in San Juan, and my grandfather would often tell me a story, probably to scare me, but like he's like, I met the devil in La Cordillera. And then not too long ago, like I tweeted that out, like you're just having dinner and your grandfather's like, I met the devil. And suddenly a lot of people who were like in the American context, diaspora of Latin America, were like, oh my God, me too. Like so many people were just like, someone just said like, I met the devil at the club or something, like some outrageous horror. Um, but then it made me think after I read Of Share of Night and this and all your other work, like story as inheritance, right? To reflect back things that are happening across the continent. And part of me has always wanted to like go back in time and after the story is told, instead of just being a kid in awe, be like, okay, what's next? Like, what else? Like, what am I supposed to do with that? And so, my question for you, Mariana, is, like after, I mean, maybe this is too personal. Like after I read A Share a Night, I was like, ¿Y qué hago ahora? Right? So, what if you could like tell me maybe, but also a general audience, because I feel like this is a reflection for many of my friends. Like, what do we do now after reading about this horror and being tied into this world? And then for Megan, for you, like for us in the diaspora, I guess, like what happens with translation, right? Because like we can read it now, maybe we can read it in Spanish, but I'm just curious as to like if there's reflections about that liminal space for that inheritance now that we have these stories in this format, but often it's just part of like the storytelling that we get from our elders and our parents that have to do with horror and the devil that they met at some point in their life in the wilds. So
I think information is something. I'm a journalist, and I've never did like to be honest, I never did real journalism or very little at the beginning because I didn't like it. So most of the time I did culture and rock and roll journalism and critique and stuff. That's not real journalism anyway. But to me, information is very important, and history is super important, and you have to know it. I'm very concerned now with young people today that they don't seem to care about history. Even this is a story about my country, but it makes a lot of sense, I think. A month ago or less, a very, very young senator, no, diputada, I don't know how you say that, representative. Yeah, she's, no, but it's underneath. We have senators and then the other ones. Anyway, and she went to see people from the junta, genocidas, to jail, and she said she was. They lied to her. They were saying that they were just seeing some political prisoners, whatever, and people were interviewing her and saying, "But don't you know who Astiz is? That it's a very if you're in, I don't know, in the Balkans, it's like Mladic. It's like a war criminal." And she was like, "No, I was born in '93." And there was a cynicism in that, but there was also truth in that. She was not lying. She thought that, why should I know that? So I know that inheritance can be very heavy, but not knowing inheritance makes you meet the devil again. Like now she has a picture with the devil for no reason, more reason than she's a silly little girl. And that she let herself take a picture with this man that is a monster. And even if she ideologically agrees with, right-wing ideas, neoliberalism, all the things that were behind the barbarity of the dictatorship, what adds, God, what adds to your life to take a picture with this man that tortured pregnant women? Because you were born in '93, this is going to give me? No, know your history, know your people, and then yes, maybe you will avoid the devil this time. If you don't know it, you won't avoid it because they're always there. And yes, he saw the devil in La Salamanca. There's caves of the devil everywhere, so he probably saw it for real, your grandpa. Twice, yeah, yeah. Because they make parties, so of course he probably went to one.
I mean, I'm not sure if this is gonna answer your question, but I have always been, I spent a long time living in Chile, and I got really interested in the stories that people tell about seeing the devil. I have a friend who wrote a book about this, about seeing ghosts, about having supernatural experiences. I got really obsessed with it, and when I met a new person, I'd be like, "Oh, what's your name? Where do you work? Have you seen a ghost?" and like I collected them a little bit, and I have I've thought a lot and questioned a lot about why that is, why people are open to supernatural experiences in Chile and in Latin America in a way that they aren't here. Because I ask the same question here, and almost never, do people have ghosts? And I feel like when you're open, like after translating Mariana, I have these ghost stories in my head. I have these images in my head, and then I see them in the world around me. And it's like this little break in reality or a slippage, and um, I feel like my perspective is better for it. It's kind of an openness, I think, and also it's an awareness or a questioning, I think, that I find myself trying to be more open to. So I don't know, like I don't know if we can say that all translation serves that purpose, but it's one thing that I get out of it.
Thank you all so much. This has been so interesting. There's a story in our in Things We Lost in the Fire that is an extended scene in Our Share of Night.
Yeah.
And the first time I read it, it gave me the worst, scariest deja vu of all time. And I've been wondering ever since the relationship between that story and scene, and if the story inspired Our Share of Night as a whole, or what the relationship there.
The story was a standalone thing, and when I was writing the novel, what I needed was a house that did what that house does, that is eating people. Like you go in and you don't come out. So I realized, oh, I wrote this story already. And I went there and I liked the setting. I liked that there were, little teeth and then nails and all kinds of stuff. And I like the idea that was bigger inside and outside. That is actually something I stole from Mark Danielewski and House of Leaves. We have to be honest. But when I decided to, it was very early draft of the novel. When I, you know, took the house and put it in the novel, I said, okay, I won't take the two friends, but I will take Adela, the girl that doesn't have an arm, because she is not the same person. It's a multiverse. But I like her as a figure, as a haunting figure, and I wanted her. The other two, no. And so they're not the same people, but I kept the same vibe. But I think you noticed that they are not the same
Oh,
people
yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Isn't Refrigerator Cemetery also an outtake?
Yeah, it's an outtake, yes. The cemetery is an outtake. What happens now?
Right.
Yes. There was a lot of outtakes, and the novel was massive.
Hi, Mariana. I was wondering if you have to pick one of your books or stories to be made, to be adapted into a film, which one will you pick? And would you prefer to be made in, like, by a Argentinian production or by Hollywood?
Well, there's three things I can tell you about that. The movie that I think it would be interesting for me to watch is Things We Lost in the Fire. I want to know, I want to see what they do with the women, how they look, if they use makeup, if they use women that are really, how you show that in images. That to me is the same. The setting is the same because what I'm talking about there is about a situation with women. It doesn't have to be local. I would like. I think My Sad Dead would make a good series, and that has to be in Argentina, as the dirty kid that to me lives down the road from the same. Uh, yes, and the one, and I want Marshall and I to meet the guys. Honest. And yeah, that would be. But that to me, that if I can dream, that I could be like a Lord of the Rings kind of thing, and that has to be local too. But I don't know if a local production. My favorite director for my stuff is Lucrecia Martel, the Argentinian one, but she said no. It's true. She said no. And oh, she said I can't do it. Whatever. She said no in a very nice way. But I like her atmosphere, the claustrophobic thing that she tells you, and the way that she cuts. I think there's something about I don't know that much about movies, but she never has people are never complete in her scenes. One doesn't have a face, one doesn't. It's like you never get the whole picture. And I really like that because I think that's very near to horror. And sometimes that's what I do too. You don't get the whole picture. You don't get everything that's going on. And she does it with visuals. So I really like her stuff. But
Buenas, buenas. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate both of your work. Uh, I am someone from the border, from El Paso, Texas, and Juarez. I grew up on a threshold of sorts, and I feel like a lot of times my whole life is explaining A to B and B to A. And I feel like, in a supernatural sense, also, there's something that, as we've discussed, is explaining, oh, we see ghosts, you don't, it's a jingo. But I'm interested in hearing your perspectives of when you're thinking about your work. Is it a difference between explaining, or this is A and this is B, or is it I'm interested in the threshold and talking about the threshold between the supernatural, our world, difference in cultures, or a difference in explaining that dichotomy, if that makes any sense.
I don't know if I completely understand, but what I can tell you is that something just Megan just said, that she collects ghost stories from people that live them, which there's a lot in my countries. My country, I say, because the countries in Latin America. But the literary horror to me was all in English. So that is a very curious situation because we don't have that much. We have a lot of fantastic literature, etc. But horror, ghost, blah blah, that is in English. That is A Christmas Carol. That is Stephen King. That is Paul Tremblay. That is Shirley Jackson. I can't name people that deal with that like that in Spanish. Yeah, I can tell you one thing, one story there. So that's an A and a B that is very strange to me. It's like in an everyday lives, there's a relationship with the supernatural that is very normal. We talk about it, etc. But it never goes to literature. And I find here, for example, that is not that normal in life, except for certain things. I think it has to do with Catholicism too. That is all about spirits. But in literature, English was my field, let's say. I learned to write horror and to write about the supernatural in English because you have to learn the language from literature, not from the stories of my grandma. My grandma was a great storyteller, but she was not a writer. And so that's not enough. And the literature of horror and of dark fantasy too and everything was all in English. So I don't know what's going on here, but yeah.
There seems to be like a resurgence of or like a big swell of horror coming out of Latin America recently. Why do you think?
To me, it has to do with the pop culture that's coming from here. Like we consume 50% of our pop culture is from the US and the UK. And then, of course, it's ours. But there's a lot. I grew up with Twin Peaks. I grew up with Spielberg. I grew up with Stephen King. I grew up with, I don't know, with, and then I'm on the street. I grew up with slashers, endless. So I think there's many it's also the aftermath of the dictatorship. We are most of us are children of the dictatorship. In some countries are Chile, they are even contemporaries, they write it. So it's a mixture of those two, but I think you can't really say that it's the political history is more important than the rest. I ran away from home to watch The Nightmare on Elm Street. I was 13. I wanted, and they didn't pay that much attention to children those days. So I arrived there and I was like, okay, go. And I will never forget that. And it was full of children there watching that. Yeah, it was wild, but yeah. I think partly it's that.
Yeah, I had an answer when you asked your question, and I think I forgot it. But I was gonna say something about when you talk about explaining A to B, that is something that I obviously have to think a lot about, because the more you do it, the more you develop a kind of strategy. Because I also think that you can trust your readers, but I'm also thinking always about what people are going to understand in Argentina versus what people are going to understand reading in English, and is what they don't understand going to impact negatively their reading experience? Because I do think there's an amount of alienation or strangeness that works to the benefit of the text. So I always have to think about what I need to explain and what I don't need to explain, because there's a lot of ambiguity that I think works. But then a lot of times I'll find myself kind of doing stealth glosses and explaining things like remember with Angelita and Earth. I think the whole tradition of baby of an Angelita, Angelito, that dies before it can sin. I didn't know that tradition, and I think it was necessary to kind of put a little bit of that in there. So I did a little explanation, just so that people could understand what that tradition is. But then there are other traditions, like I think it's that story where she talks about putting bottles in the ground.
Yeah.
I remember asking you what that was about, and you just said, "No, I just made that up." So there's some traditions that you don't have to explain, or some traditions that are made up. Like sometimes the monsters come from Mariana's head, and sometimes the monsters come from a tradition. And I do have to think about how much of that tradition you have to explain in order to be understood. But I always go back to the translation of Rayuela, which has a lot of Spanish. Like the very Rabasa translation keeps a lot of stuff in Spanish. There's also a lot of French, and I read those things when I was very monolingual, and it didn't hold me back. I still was intrigued. I don't know if that answers your question.
And we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for being here. This has been so awesome. I have a question kind of about the structure of the novel, because interspersed with different things, you have these kind of three acts of the father and son, the son in his adolescent life, and then with the father, and then finally the kind of son years later after the father, ending with his coming to terms with this horrific inheritance. And it was the kind of book where I was always surprised where we landed, but then after I read it, I was like, what else could have happened. And so I was wondering if when you were writing the book, you always knew if that was where the story was going to go, and how that differed that differs from conceiving of short stories and their structure.
I think basically what she's asking is if there's going to be a sequel.
No
it's-
pressure on a sequel.
It's finished. It's finished. It's totally over. But I always knew it had 4 parts and the interlude. I thought about it as a record. And I always knew the first part was like road movie ends up in ritual. Then one of, in this case, the doctor, because I really like the language of medicine. As my mother is a doctor, so I'm very familiar with it. And it's like code. It's like it's pornography. It's like a very, they're talking about the body with euphemisms that they only understand. And it's very strange. Like everything that's positive is bad. If you get a positive in laboratory thing, it's bad most of the time, which is kind of, Uh, and then I knew that the second part was the kids in a very Stephen King kind of bikes thing, but I knew that the first thing that had to happen was the bike being broken, because to show you that that is not that kind of childhood. And then I knew it was Britain, but that was very difficult. And then at the end, it was like a education novel, initiation, coming of age. Then the characters do whatever they want. But I always knew that was kind of the journey. And what helped me is that but in fact, if you think about it, it's chronological. Gaspar is 5 when it starts, and then he's a young man when it ends. The only thing that is not chronological is when the mother appears, and she appears in first person and is telling things that don't really relate that much to what's happening to the plot. So it's a bit of for me, it was trying to do a chronological novel with ellipses, with massive ellipses of things that were unimportant, or you could tell, or those years between Gaspar being 5 and then being 12. Well, nothing really happened. Things went on, and what happens is that I wanted, the life when Juan dies. That's why I wanted to. But it's chronological. It's just this huge part of the story that I'm not telling you about, because it's ellipsis. And it's, of course, it's very different to a short story. A short story to me is very fast. It comes. It's my narrative language. It's Borges. It's Cortázar. It's what I learned. And a novel, it's about the characters, and it's a whole different journey. So yeah, but it's chronological, and the one I'm writing now is chronological too. But I also had a trick like that. You can't really, write a novel that is completely chronological, a la Tolstoy anymore, and because we don't even know how to do that, or you have to be a genius to do that. So, and I really like my favorite novels have 4 parts. So, Héroes y Tumbas, The Samato, The Sound and the Fury. I don't know, I like the 4 parts. I like the records like that too. Mm.
To me, they feel like long songs, and then in between,
Yeah.
there's like diversions.
Yeah.
Incantations, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
thank
being
you.
here. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Megan.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, folks, if you already have your book and you want to get it personalized, you can line up right here in front of this door and back to the aisle. If you need to buy a book, they're over at the bookstore, and come back in here to get it personalized. And if you're not getting your book personalized, please exit out the back door.